Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Leading Change. My name is Emma, and I have Cody with me today, and we're going to be talking about the role of, I always say, the unsung heroes that are in middle management, that are kind of stuck between the rock and the hard place, and how they can help us lead change. But before I get to all the questions that I've got for you, can you give everybody an introduction?
Yeah, I'm Cody Pavlat. I'm the manager of training and education for AF Group, but I've kind of like steeped my life in change. So outside of my 9 to 5, I work with young professionals on the transition periods between, college and career, or, individual contributor management. And then prior to coming to AF Group, I did a lot of work with large corporations and startups on, implementing new technologies for education and communications. So that's a little bit about me.
Great. Well, I'm excited to have you here with me. And I just gave the teaser. So this first question, very clear follow through to kind of what we're talking about. But to help set the stage, can you talk about the role that middle management has in implementing technology or any sort of change within an organization?
Yeah, absolutely. So I like you believe that they're like the unsung heroes of change. They bridge the gap between senior leadership vision and individual contributors like execution phase. And so the role that they play is creating a feedback loop. And so oftentimes when we think about change, we think about it from the senior leadership. We hear this phrase all the time, like, leaders need to cascade communication, but it's not just the cascade of communication. It is, how do you take that communication, ask the right questions up front, and then bring that to your team in a way that's palatable for them so that they can go out and execute with the highest level of confidence. Change is this really intimate thing with individuals, and you get to serve as the messenger and also the reverse messenger. Like, I'm going to take this back to senior leadership if there are any concerns, comments, questions, or as I like to add in there, erroneous opinions. So that's the big role I think that leaders play. If we really had to bridge the gap between vision and execution, it's creating that feedback loop so that they can continually drive forward the change for their teams.
So I love that. And I'm just going to go on a tangent before I ask your next question, because this weekend I saw a video from a very large creator that does leadership training and a lot of career development content. And she had a post that was saying that it's not your manager's job to listen to your opinions about a change. And I was like, no, wrong. That's literally their entire job. That doesn't mean that they report everything up. That doesn't mean they take every piece of feedback. But that is literally their job, and that is what they are there for. So I got kind of heated about that, and then seeing that we're having this conversation today, I just needed to put that back out to the world again, that is in fact the feedback loop, and the conversation and bi-directional communication is pretty much the entire function.
Yeah, 1,000%. It is. You might not share the erroneous opinions that go back, right? You might not share them in maybe the way that they communicated it, but if you're a good leader, you've created that psychological safety on your team in order for them to share that erroneous opinion, knowing that you're not going to take that back to senior leaders in that same way. And so I probably should preface all the things that we're talking about today with full stop. If you haven't created psychological safety on your team, none of this really matters. It kind of becomes kind of icky as you start talking about change. You're like, oh, they're just trying to get me to do something. And that's not the role that you have as a leader. Your leader is, as a leader, you have to make your team feel safe and they want to run through a wall for the change, right? They have to understand the why, the what's in it for them. They're not going to believe you if you didn't create safety for them. And the number one way to do that is listening to those erroneous opinions, because they're steeped in some form of truth, some sort of fear, uncertainty, and doubt that happens in change all the time.
Yeah. Well, and I think this is a nice lead in then to when you are talking to leaders that are in this position somewhere in the middle, how are you coaching them to answer the right questions throughout the process? So in going back up to get feedback or get additional information to bring back in that feedback loop, but also to get the people that they are trying to get buy-in from a change, to get them to understand the why and the what's in it for me.
Yeah, for sure. So I'll start with like maybe the senior leadership side of this. So if you're being an effective like middle manager in this capacity, you already know if you, again, creating psychological safety, you already know your teams like what they're going to be interested in and what they're going to want to know. So when you know that vision's about to be set around a change effort, you probably need to come prepared with some questions. And I always like to coach leaders on doing it in a way that's disarming. So maybe it's the issue of timing. You can't be like, well, January doesn't work for us, right? But maybe you can say something like, hey, my team in the past has had some challenges around, the winter months, and how can I help them get over that as they're talking to senior leaders. That piece, if you have that, that's a very disarming question. It sounds like you're in support, like you're prepared, and that you want to see this be successful, while simultaneously voicing a real concern. And that's really where you can shine working with senior leaders. And it also helps you really tease out some little aspects of the program where you can be like, oh, I can take that and then communicate it down to my team and tailor it to what my team typically wants. So that's kind of the upward, downward discussion with senior leaderships. Now, when you're taking it to your team, it's all about asking your team the right questions. And so you've gone through, you've talked to senior leaders, you know everything, you've anticipated some of the objections your team's going to have, but then you take the vision to your team and then you need to ask a really powerful question at the end. That question at the end of communicating the vision, and I say the end, and maybe it's that message because you're probably going to be messaging multiple things throughout this process, but is asking them a scaled question. So if anybody's familiar with Adam Grant, he's really big into the second score, which is not how you score the first time around, but how you score the second time. So I ask 10-point scale questions for everything, and I ask the leaders to do this as well. So a question might be, hey, on a scale of 1 to 10, how ready are you to adopt this? And then you have to follow up on it. So it might be anywhere from like a 1 to a 9 is a perfect example. If you get a 10 and they're fully ready to adopt, then great, just keep building with your team. But anywhere from 1 to 9, you have gap to ask them the follow-up question, which is, okay, so what would get you from a 5 to a 7? And is there something I can do to help? And then take notes, make sure that you show that you care. And that process, you got to know, hey, that's unfortunate that it's a 5, but I do understand where you're coming from. And let's see if we can get you to a 7. And then take those notes that you just wrote down and follow up with leadership to the point of creating a feedback loop to gather more information and then bring that back to your team. And now your team's like, oh, I said something. They listened. And now they're actually making changes and strides. And that might also open a blind spot because this might not just be your team. I used to say when I trained in classrooms all the time, it would be like, don't not ask the question right now. And then as you're driving home, be punching the steering wheel because you're like, I should have asked, right? Somebody else is usually thinking that question and they're just maybe too afraid to say it. So by doing that, you give senior leadership the opportunity to message something new. And then, you can bring that back to your team and be like, hey, here's what we did. So just to kind of recap, because I know I hit a few different things there. With senior leaders, you want to ask them disarming questions where it's, hey, anticipating the needs of my team, but in a way that shows that you support them. And with your team, you need to give them a framework that's not just like any questions, but just say, hey, use this 10-point scale to tell me how do I get you from a 2 to a 7 maybe. And in that way, you can kind of start to work through the feedback loop as you are managing the change.
And I love that you didn't say from like a 2 to a 10, because we know that that's also probably not realistic when people haven't seen change and movement and like had that feeling of like, oh, okay, you are listening and you do care. And that might actually move them beyond that 7 if they see movement in the right direction or they get a deeper understanding of what's going on. But I think that was a really important piece, is that you're not necessarily always going to have 100% foot on the gas acceptance, but getting people closer to that and getting acceptance and agreement to move in the right direction is a big part of the equation. And so the last piece that I want to ask here is tied to, let's say our team, we've got a really great change management team. We have a whole training department. Why can't, as a middle manager, you just say the training department's got it, the communication team's got it, the change has already been those conversations have already happened, and kind of like farm out this idea of adoption. And going back to what I said about that video that made me all heated, like, it's not my job to do this. I don't have to listen to your erroneous opinions. How come we can't just farm it out like that?
Yeah. Red flag number one, if you're ever working on a change management project and one of the leaders says, when is my team going to get training? Or when is my team going to hear about this? Snarkily, I want to be like, as soon as you tell them, as soon as you train them. But we don't do that, right? Obviously, we're here to help. That's the function that we want to do. And I kind of alluded to it earlier. Change is super personal, and your team needs you to be at the forefront of that change. And so in the process of feedback loops, this is another feedback loop that you're going to create. It is, hey, how can I get on board, right? So you're in a meeting with training, and you may be a little concerned about the product, which we all probably are, if we're being honest. When changes are happening, we're not like, everybody's not always running through a brick wall for change immediately, right? They want to find out more information. So you're not really delegating the transformation of your team. You're saying, hey, how can I learn more about this? And what that'll do is maybe you could get in there and see a product demo sooner, or maybe you can see a new process or walk through it with somebody. And in that capacity, you can see it and anticipate maybe some of the objections, or you can keep senior leaders honest to say, hey, you said this one feature was going to be in here. What happened? How do I best message this to my team, knowing that it might be a fast follower or something that's coming in the next, year or so, so that you have a time frame for it. If you start to delegate too much of that out as a leader, what will happen is you become a scapegoat. You create scapegoats, and then it's like the Spider-Man meme where everybody's pointing to each other, right? It's not helpful. So I think a leader has to be, when you're talking about driving change, you have to be, one, the first line of communication, a resource that knows the answer or can find the answer quickly. And the best way to do that is by getting engaged in the process fully. You're a coach and a model. And not like a runway model, you're going to model the behavior so that they know exactly what they should be doing. Because if you come in and say, well, I talked to IT about that and I don't know what happened, they're going to carry that behavior forever. And I don't want to make it seem like it's overly dramatic to say forever. They will. They saw the excuse and they're going to tag on to that. And so what you have to do is you have to take ownership of that. So some ways that we coach leaders to do that are, hey, when can I get hands-on support for my team? Or when your team comes to you with a challenge, it says, oh, I saw that during the demos. Do you remember this thing? And it gives you a frame of reference to kind of navigate things that are a little bit off what maybe you thought it was going to be. And then lastly, hey, I say this to my team, is like, hey, we're going to figure this out together. And those statements are all leadership statements. So asking questions is like of the most important in this capacity. And if you stop asking questions and making statements like, hey, somebody else will train you, or they'll figure it out, or you have to be able to tag into, let's do this together. Let me find out an answer. How is this making you feel is another one. Those type of things really get you in a position to own it, and your team will mirror that behavior. You, like I said, are the model. Don't wait for somebody else to fix it. Again, that's scapegoating. You own it. Say like, oh yeah, I'll figure this out. We can figure this out. Hold steady. Let me get you an answer. That's huge. And then you're going to step in, clarify, walk alongside your team, because the reality is change is happening constantly, it's just typically when we see the bigger ones, we lean in and we're like, oh no, this is AI or technology this. And at the end of the day, it could be as simple as, hey, today you can't park in this parking lot at the building, or hey, today you're not going to be able to use Teams, so you're going to have to call somebody on the phone, right? Those are changes. And if you're a leader that taps out and gets frustrated with a different group, your team's going to carry that energy as well. So do not try to farm this to somebody else. Own it yourself and say, hey, we're going to get through this together. And to the point about psychological safety, it continues to build that as well.
Well, thank you so much for joining me for the conversation, and for everybody who joined us and gave a watch. Make sure, if you're not already, to follow Cody on LinkedIn and get connected, and reach out to either one of us if you have any questions about the discussion. But again, thank you for your time, and for everybody for joining, and have a wonderful day. Thanks for joining us for this episode of Leading Change. If you like what you saw, be sure to come back on a weekly basis and subscribe for more expert interviews focused on digital transformation, change management, and emerging technologies.